Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are here talking about how to get jobs internationally if you are a U.S. citizen. So, I have my lovely guest today, and those of you who've been rocking with me for a while, you have met this guest before. This is Maggie from Chicago. How you doing, Maggie?
I'm fine. How are you today?
I'm doing well. And for those of you who have been rocking with me for a while, I encourage you, if you haven't seen the interview that Maggie and I did, it was like 3 years ago. Please check out that interview. I'm going to put a link in the description because Maggie gave some really, really interesting information as to how to find a job in another country, specifically Stockholm. So we're updating this and we're talking about how do you find a job internationally. So Maggie, give us some of your tips and trips. And for those who have not met you before, how did you go from Chicago to Europe?
Okay, so when I was working in Chicago, my company was a small company in the software development industry for the financial sector, and it was acquired by a European based company. And because I worked in quality assurance and I started specializing in test automation, that was a skill set that was very difficult to find at that time. And so they invited me to travel to Sweden to meet colleagues and sort of kind of work with me from there. And then that turned into coming and living here part time. So I would come for 3 months, go home for 3 months. And then I was like, this is cool. This is a new experience. And so we decided that I should come over for a year. But I ended up getting laid off just before we finalized the arrangements. And already being in the mindset to live here for a year, I took it upon myself to look for a job, found one, got the right permits, and moved. And I've been here now for about 15 years.
Oh, Maggie, I didn't even think I knew it was that long. So when you say you got laid off and then you started looking for a job in Sweden, how did you do that specifically?
Okay, so I listed a number of points that I would like to share. But
Sure.
at that time, what I would do is I would go to the job site. So at that time, it was like monster.com. And then there was a site that was very popular here in Sweden, or actually in Europe, called Stepstone. And I would just basically apply for jobs that met my requirements, and then I would have interviews with the people that found my CV very interesting. And I did have my CV written in English at the time, and once I was able to get a couple of people interested in really taking me seriously, I offered to come for an in person interview at my own expense. So, a lot of times people look for relocation packages, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you can get it, that's great. But depending on how serious you are, you may have to think about investing yourself. So, I invested coming to Sweden for about 1 week. And once I knew I was going to be in Sweden, then other people were interested because they could meet me in person. I ended up going from 2 interviews to 11 interviews in 1 week. And that resulted in 3 job offers. And once I got the job offer, they helped me get the job permit. And once I got the job permit, I was clear to just make my relocation. But I had to finance it myself in this particular case. Today, LinkedIn is the site that is really popular for people to look for jobs. So basically, it's a similar process, but the sites have changed. Like you would go to LinkedIn, look for available jobs in the area. Another thing is connecting with recruiters who specialize in a particular area, and that's how you can end up finding a job. And I have other points to add to that, but that's a starting point.
No, that's a really good point. And I know for those, and myself included, I'm not on LinkedIn. I keep saying, I said when we had our interview last, I was going to get in LinkedIn and I didn't. But what I could say from my friends here who were born and raised in Europe, and even the ones who live here in Portugal, they have all gotten their jobs from LinkedIn. So I
Yeah.
know in the States we may be like, oh, it's like a Facebook but professional, but like internationally, it is a big deal. So if you're listening to this and you don't have your LinkedIn profile and you want to get jobs internationally, we're telling you right now, it's important to get that profile together.
Yes. And actually, LinkedIn has a new feature that you can activate called Open to Work. And when you activate it, that will alert people who are seeking candidates to kind of better filter for people who are actually looking for work. And so, what I have found is you want to activate that. You want to keep your profile updated. You want to have an updated CV. And depending on what industry you're working in, you want to make sure that you have the CV in the right language. So, in the tech industry, English is usually the common language, so English is fine. But, like, let's say you're going to be a doctor, you should have it in the local language, or you should have a version of it in the local language.
Okay.
And you would connect with people who are recruiting for positions, and you can connect with recruiters. When you connect with recruiters, you have an opportunity to share what you're looking for, where you're looking for it, and they also become a resource to connect you to jobs, because some companies they only go through recruiters, but they really do look at LinkedIn. Also, I found that once you kind of learn what companies are recruiting, I like to look to see if they have an international presence. And so, what I will do is I will go to their website to see what jobs they're offering and what locations they're offering it. So, since COVID, a lot of companies are hiring hybrid and remote. And so if it's remote, you still have to live in the location where they have an office, because you have the taxes and
Yeah.
other laws of labor laws that you have to adhere to. But that also opens your options. So if you can imagine, let's say you work for a company that has a presence in the US and you can work remote, and you want to relocate to Portugal, Sweden, or London, you can then kind of keep your eye out for those positions, apply internally, and then say, I'm willing to relocate to that location. So that's another way people are doing it.
I love it. And so you talked a little bit about recruiters. So when you're looking for recruiters that are international, how do you go about finding recruiters?
I have to kind of be honest and say the recruiters usually find me.
Okay.
So when you're on LinkedIn and you kind of update your profile and you have open to work, they will then seek you out. But then what
Okay.
you want to do is build a relationship with them so that they can become another resource to connecting you to available positions.
Oh, that's helpful. And I don't have too much information on finding jobs internationally, so Maggie's going to lead most of this conversation. But I just wanted to give some information that I've learned just living in Portugal. And one of the things is when you want to know the job sites that are best for the location you're looking for, because that varies. I know in the US, sometimes people are looking at Indeed, and here in Portugal, Indeed is not as popular. So there's some other websites, and I'll put those in the description of this video. But what I will say is to consider going to like DeepL or Google Translate and finding out what best job sites is in that native language. So in Portuguese, you can put that in and search that way instead of searching in English for best job sites in Portugal. Search in the native language of the country, and then you're more likely going to come up with a better Google answer. And at the end of this video, I'll try to do some screen shares of that so that that makes a little bit more sense, because then you're able to see what people in that country have searched for in regards to the job sites, and they're going to be different for each country. So I just wanted to share that little bit. What do you have to say about that, Maggie?
Completely agree. And like I said, it also depends on the industry that you're looking in. That can also be very important.
And so you initially did Sweden, then you did Germany, and then you came back to Sweden. So how did you go about finding the job in Germany?
It was really a similar process. On LinkedIn, I connected with a recruiter who actually connected me to the interview. And actually I was in the US when I interviewed. So the interview was completely by telephone and by video chat, and they hired me. And then after that they said, oh, can you start in like 6 weeks? And so I flew back to Sweden, packed my little rags, put them in the car, and drove to Germany. I actually drove there to
Girl,
meet
okay.
Germany and started working there. And once I arrived, they were able to help me finalize getting my job permit or work permit that allowed me to work and live in Germany. So it was find the job, get accepted, arrive there, and then we finalized the work permit and the job permit. But you always want to go to the migration or immigration websites of that country, because of course things change and they update things all the time. So for example, in Sweden, you cannot relocate here until you have the job permit. So that's one of the things you want to do if you're interested in working in another country. You want to check out the immigration migration websites, see what their latest laws or rules are for relocating or migrating, and then adhere to those rules. So, like I said, in Germany, I could get the job and then apply for the job permit with the assistance of the company. But in Sweden, you may have to get the job, and then the job will kind of go through the process of helping you get the job permit before you make that trip to Sweden.
And I think that's a good point because so much is changing in the world right now. The economy is changing, immigration is changing all over the place. So just to be safe, figure out what the immigration process is, because just because you watched a video 2 months ago does not mean that the immigration process is the same. Immigration changes often. I mean, even in my little almost 5 years, I've noticed that various things with immigration change, and you just want to be kind of aware of whatever type of emergencies that can happen so that you have the financial backing to be able to do what you need to do. So I know there's
Yes.
people saying, you know, you can move out of the country for $1,500 a month. I would not recommend that. Like, please don't do that. It is not, it's not smart, okay? Because anything can happen. And usually when something happens, it's never a cheap problem. It's always an expensive one.
I would definitely recommend having a financial war chest. One person that I helped relocate here to Sweden, they saved up 2 years of living expenses so that they're covered. And so that's another thing that you want to do is you want to basically have a financial war chest just in case anything happen or things don't work out the way you want them to work. And then when you do make that initial voyage, my argument would be to find an inexpensive way to live so that you don't overconsume your financial resources. um, for example, let's say you don't pass probation on the job, and then they said, okay, now you have to leave the country. You want to be able to have the finances to kind of navigate that. Um, and you don't want to overinvest in furniture and apartments. You want to kind of make sure your job security is there before you make those investments in housing.
That's a really good point. I think with so much going on in the US, especially as it relates to finance and just things being unsustainable, I think some people are considering moving abroad solely for what looks like financial gain, right? But
Mhm.
there's still so many aspects of moving abroad that cost a lot of money. And
Yes.
it frightens me when I hear people say, oh, I'm going to do this for this amount. And I'm like, you haven't a clue how much this stuff costs. So even if you're thinking about moving abroad in general, I would hope that you have a series of reasons why you're moving so that if one of those things change, it doesn't destroy your whole experience. Like if it's just about money, as soon as that changes or currency changes, now what? If it's, just about X, Y, and Z, like if you have more than one reason for moving abroad, then I think you're going to have a better moving abroad experience.
And speaking of money, if I can mention, a lot of
Absolutely.
times we tend to compare what the value of the currency is in one country with the value of the US dollar. And then they think, okay, I earn, let's say, $90,000 a year in the US. I want the equivalent in the other country. It doesn't work like that. You really have to look at what the competitive salary is in that country, and you have to look at the cost of living in that country. And so you have to look at what the salary range is for the job that you're applying to. What I kind of learned, what we pay and what we earn in the US has nothing to do with what I pay and what I earn in Sweden. That is another thing that when you are looking for a job and you're trying to figure out your salary requirements or what's a reasonable salary, you might want to research. I do this type of work,
Yeah.
this is the competitive salary for that type of job. And my experience is here. So let's say, for example, you might be making the equivalent of 6,000 euros in the US, but in Sweden, the equivalent of 3,800 euros is sufficient and competitive. And a
Well,
lot of
it's
times,
a, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, sorry about that. And one more thing is a lot of times they have drilled it in people's head, oh, you pay 50% of your taxes. And that's not exactly true. Um, I would argue I probably pay collectively 5 to 7% more in taxes than I did in the US. If you're adding federal, state, Social
Right.
Security, Medicare. So you're not paying 50%. And they have tax brackets as well. So it's not, I earn 90,000, so I'm gonna take home 45,000 a year. It doesn't work that way.
Not to mention when they have taxes in other countries, you actually get something for it, like free
Yeah.
education, affordable health care, and all of those other things. Your tax money goes to your benefit as well.
There is an array of benefits, which is, something, like they don't like paying taxes here in Sweden either, but they like the benefits that they get for their tax dollars. So you would be surprised at everything that you get in return. And actually, your take home pay becomes higher just in healthcare alone because of the tax. The healthcare is paid for by your tax contribution and not you paying an insurance company. And that alone significantly reduces your contribution.
And I want to go back to what you said in regards to understanding what your position, the
Hmm.
pay is in that particular country. And
Hmm.
so, for many of you, like I try to be pretty transparent about Portugal and its lack of employment opportunities. So when you're
Hmm.
looking, if you want to move to Europe, not lack of employment opportunities, but lack of employment opportunities that pay well in comparison to other European countries. You can look and Google that information as to what countries fall where in regards to a particular field and what they pay. Just as professionals, as doctors, as engineers, as any of those things, what they pay, and then you want to learn how much is rent. And I think where Portugal has a disadvantage is based on the max that they pay for certain high professional industries and the amount it costs for rent right now because of this influx of rent just being super expensive. It will make things difficult. So usually I say, listen, if you're still in a place where you still need to bring in income and you're not retired and you decide to move to Portugal, if you are moving to Portugal and you have a remote US job, you already know that just jobs in general in the US are laying people off. And the last thing you want to do is be stuck in a country where you couldn't get a job here even if you wanted to. So
Right.
think about those things when you're choosing the country that you want to live in and the country you're looking for employment in. That's going to be really important.
I absolutely agree. There are a number of people that lost their um, permission to reside in the country because their income came from the US. And this is something that you want to kind of make sure you pay attention to in their immigration laws, and that is you have to have a registered income in that country.
Mm-hmm.
And so with remote work, it's fabulous that you can live in one location and earn money in another location. But if you're not a tax paying citizen, you need to kind of make sure that you are still in alignment with the requirements of your visa when you do that,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that country's rules are.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people getting deported from Sweden because they do have an income, but according to Sweden, they don't have an income,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they don't have a bank account, they don't have an income.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you are looking to relocate countries, I always say have a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, and G.
Absolutely.
And so, and
Absolutely.
so if you do work remotely, great, but make sure that you have the ability to kind of look for work if that work ends in the country that you're living in.
Yes, and let me also just with Portugal's visas. So there's the D7 visa, which is the visa I came on. Then since the pandemic, Portugal created the digital nomad visa that, in my opinion, doesn't seem that much different than the D7. But in this process of transition, in which now when people contact me about moving to Portugal, I'm like, listen, it's not that you shouldn't move. I just think that you should just wait a little bit, right? Because you have to fulfill your immigration obligation. And as
Mhm.
much money and effort that you put into moving to this country, if something happens with the income, you will be deported. So if you are in a situation where it's not time to renew your visa, you may have a short period of time where you kind of like, but when you have to do the renewal and be legal in that country, you have to show documentation. You have to show bank stubs. You have to show all of that. And if you can't, you will have to go, and you would have wasted all the money of you coming to any country. So
Mhm.
it's like, if you're going to move now, and I understand there's a new election coming up, and so people are really stressed out, I get it. But it's probably even more expensive to do it now than it has ever been before.
Yes.
So if that's the case, you need to save even more money than
Mhm.
anyone online is telling you to do. Please save your money because anything can happen and it can end up becoming very expensive.
Right. And if I could piggyback on that just
Sure.
to connect the dots, you want to make sure that you build up your financial war chest. In Sweden, they tell you you need to have X amount of dollars for 2 years. So, in other words, you have to have X amount per month of living expenses for 2 years. So, that's one thing that you want to do. You want to make sure that if you end up without an income, you can survive X amount of time before you are in trouble. You have a bandwidth of time to make decisions. That's number one. Number two, you want to be able to seek out employment. And I would say seek out that employment first and let them know that, hey, I'm willing to relocate to a location where I can legally work. That's number two. So if you want to go to Portugal or if you want to go to Sweden or Germany, make sure that they have a location where you can legally work there and earn a salary there. Number three, that company should play a role in helping you get the correct job residence permits that will allow you to work in that country. And one thing that you need to be forewarned about is that a lot of these jobs have a probation period. Just because you fly over the Atlanta does not mean that you won't have to that probation period doesn't apply to you. So usually it's a 3 month or 6 month probation period where they will decide whether they're going to continue the contract with you or not. In Sweden, once you get to 6 months, you're pretty secure,
Yeah.
but you want to make sure that you know you pass probation before you start getting into any more investments and living into the country. Um, and then finally, and what I can say specifically for Sweden is they have unions here. And one of the things that you can do is you can join the union. Like in the tech industry, a lot of people belong to the unioning. Another popular one is called fuck it. And I know what that sounds like. I laughed about it for years, but it's actually spelled FAACKET. And those are two very popular unions, and they both allow you to join something they call CASA, which is their unemployment insurance that you pay for yourself. Doing that helps you secure your residency permit. Because if you find yourself unemployed and you've met the terms of the unemployment, then you will be able to have unemployment income for as short as 6 months to as long as a year and a half. And that also gives you some type of security. Um, and you can use tools like LinkedIn to search for jobs. You can use the feature open to work, which will allow people to know that you're an available, a person who's interested in a new opportunity. And then, as Cinnamon said, you can then look up other very popular job search engines in that country by using ChatGPT or Google Translate to kind of see what the popular search engines are for that particular country. So I just wanted to kind of tie all of that together. And one more thing that I want to add to that: when you're seeking new opportunities, your chances of finding an opportunity in a country is where they have a resource deficit in an industry. Like the last time I looked up the tech industry, they need about 30,000 tech people here in Sweden, the last time I checked. You're going to have a better chance at getting a job in that industry than, let's say, I don't know, a teacher where they don't have a deficit. So that is something to also take into consideration.
That's a really good tip. So, how do you recommend finding out what industries are in deficits of particular countries?
I mean, one way is, you can look at the jobs that you're seeking and then you can see what's available and you can see how many jobs are available. Since I've been working in tech, I mean, every day there's new opportunities. And with the rise of AI and AI sort of changing a lot of
Right.
things and cloud technologies, you have a lot of jobs that are centered around AI, automation, DevOps, um, cloud engineering, Azure, and security, data protection.
Right.
Those are really big right now. So if you happen to be in that industry, your chances are higher at finding a job in another country than, like I said, and nothing against teachers, but it's like they may have their own pool of resources for teachers. The only time that it might be interesting is if they need people who teach in English and you have a good command of the language, and then you might be able to find opportunities related to that.
No, that's helpful. And so, just to go back really quickly, when you talked about you paid for yourself to go to Sweden and you lined up all of your interviews. How did you alert the other companies that you were coming to Sweden to do a bunch of interviews? Because if I know it's anything like how jobs are now, you don't even really get to talk to anybody until you're like toward the end part of.
Oh, I wasn't shy. At that
Okay.
time, when I wrote my cover letter, I would basically include in the cover letter that I was open to relocating. And that usually would say, oh, well, she has a really good background. Let me interview with her. And then I reinforced that when I talked to them.
Okay.
And then if they were not willing to pay for the flight to come over for a second interview, I would say that, hey, if you're interested, I'm willing to finance myself to come over. However, post COVID, it's a little bit easier because people are willing to interview you remotely and then hire you remotely.
So when you were lining up all your interviews, did you just contact the people you spoke with and said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to be here on this week. Are you interested in doing a second interview?" Is that how that worked?
Something like that. So when I made the initial contact, I made sure to include a cover letter. And in the
Mm-hmm.
cover letter, I was like, I am interested. Um, it, I am available to relocate, and I am willing to fly over for an in person interview.
Okay.
And that was enough to have them interested. And then,
Okay.
if the first interview went really well, and they said something like, hey, if you find yourself in Sweden, let us know. We would really like to talk with you. Once I got a couple of those people, then I paid for myself to come over. But
Mm-hmm.
then once I had a fixed date,
Mm-hmm.
anybody else that I talked to, I immediately said, hey, I'm going to be in town this
Mm-hmm.
week. And
Mm-hmm.
then they took advantage of the time that
Mm-hmm.
I was there. And that's how I ended up with 11 interviews. And I don't really recommend that many interviews in 1 week. That was like a job and a half. And then, you're even though I was somewhat familiar with Stockholm, it was still like there was so much walking and trying to find addresses,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you're trying to do it on a shoestring budget,
Right.
yeah, it
Right,
was a lot.
right, right. No, you gave some really good tips. I think the one that I just want to remind people of is whatever country you're getting ready to move to, do it as cheaply as possible. Don't rush out and get furniture. Don't rush out and pay all these things because you don't know what's going to happen. And that 6 month job probationary period is a big deal. I know in Portugal, for my friends who have contracts here, it's usually 6 months that they have to be okay to see if their contract will get picked up. And if it doesn't get picked up, like Maggie said, your immigration status can be affected drastically, and you may have to go back to wherever your home country is. But Maggie, can you talk a little bit about just because when you talked about this in the last interview, you were making me think, dang, I need to move to Sweden. But just how Sweden sets you up after, let's say, a job loss from a company. Like, don't they have to give you like what, a month or two notice in advance?
So what's common here in Sweden is that when you join a company, you get a contract. And if you're on probation, which is usually the first 6 months, they have to give you 2 weeks' notice. So you have at least 2 weeks before they terminate you. And they give you that 2 weeks' pay. So even if they say, okay, we'll relieve you of your duties today, they still give you 2 weeks' pay.
Mm-hmm.
Once you pass probation, then it's usually by contract, they have to give you 2 or 3 months notification. So that means that if you tell me today you don't work here anymore, you're still going to get a salary for the next 3 months from that day. So that means that you're going to get at least two full time salaries and one half time in any vacation that you've accumulated. If they don't have a good reason for firing you, you can actually challenge it. And that's where the union comes in. There was one time I was in that situation. And so instead of getting 3 months' pay, I got 6 months full time
Nice,
pay.
nice.
So, so yeah. And that's before unemployment kicks in.
Okay.
Once unemployment kicks in, and you pay for our casa, which is their unemployment insurance, you can collect up to 80% of your salary for about 6 months to a year. And then after that, you can collect 60% for another half a year. So if you're wise and you're living frugal and you save your
Mm-hmm.
money, you essentially, when you add it all up, you have a year and a half to 2 years before you have to worry about money. But most times when I found myself in that situation, I looked for a job, so
Mm-hmm.
I never really, you know, it never got detrimental for me.
Yeah. And so is education free in Sweden?
It used to be, but now for immigrants, you have to pay.
Okay.
But a lot of times the companies give you a training budget. Your union gives you a training budget annually. So that is a way of continuing your education. And then you can get a grant for other or a scholarship for university. I'm not
Okay.
fully sure how that works.
Okay.
I haven't looked into it lately, but yeah, you do have to pay. But I still don't think it is as expensive as it is in the US.
Oh, I'm sure it's not. Like those prices are crazy. So
Yeah.
it's good to know that after you set your life up and you work, if you happen to get laid off, you could potentially go to college, get a whole new set of skills, and get a different type of job. And I
Yeah.
think that is what I thought was super attractive as it relates to just encompassing this citizen, or to be able to move into something different if something is to happen.
Yes. And it also helps kind of protects your immigration status.
How
Yeah.
so?
Because then you're here legally either going to school or you're working.
So if you've gotten laid off and you still have the income from your prior job, that still allows you to be
Yes.
within immigrant.
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay. So even if you're on unemployment status, it still allows you to be
Because
okay
you have
with
an
your
income.
immigration.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. You could even start your own business.
Nice. And this is what I want people to understand is that, again, you are an immigrant, so you really need to understand how the immigration process works, and you need to know when the immigration that you apply for changes, because
Yes.
that can happen. So let's say if you came here as a student, the student visa is going to be completely different than the D7. And if you have to
Yes.
transition from one type of visa to another, it could start your calendar all over on day one.
Yeah, exactly.
And no one
And
can tell
those
you that,
can
but the people.
differ from country to country.
So that is something, in my opinion, there's certain aspects of this that you don't want to just trust someone's word. You want to do the work and
Right.
find out what it is. When I
Yes.
moved to Portugal, there wasn't much information online as to how to do it. So I had to go search for this information, but I felt very confident in the decisions I made because I sought it out based on that place. It's
Mhm.
very it's concerning if you're just going based on what's online or what's in a forum or what's on a Facebook group about your immigration. Like, you have to really
Mhm.
understand that the immigration process is going to be different based on the visa. And if your circumstances change, your visa may have to change and you may have to start off from day one. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I just have a few more
Yeah,
points if
yeah, of
it's
course.
okay.
Talk to me. Talk to me. Go ahead.
So one of the things that I made light of in when I talked about moving to Germany, it's like I just jumped in my car and went, but I want to go into it a little bit deeper.
Sure.
Um, I have an apartment here in Sweden. I'm the first hand lease. So one of the things that the visa requirements also look for is to see if you own your own house, your own condo, or you at least are have a first hand contract on an apartment. That means that you have some type of permanent status. So when I went to Germany, I didn't give up my apartment. You can legally hold on to your apartment for a year. So if things didn't work out, I could always go back to Sweden. Um,
Did you have to
when I,
still pay rent there, or if you paid rent,
I,
can you continue to
I
pay it? Can you keep it forever?
you can
Okay.
in Sweden, and when you give it up, you have to give a 3 month notice.
Okay.
But what I did was I subleased my apartment.
Ah, okay.
So when I drove to Germany, what I decided to do was I got what they call an extended stay apartment that was already furnished. That meant that I could just move in. I took my little bags out the car myself, my little dog, and we just went upstairs to the house, and it was already furnished. And all I had to do was buy food, and I was good to go. I, unless you're rich, I recommend going that route because you're looking to be as frugal as possible. And apartments in Sweden and apartments in Germany are very expensive, and the expenses are going up. And when you're talking about moving into an apartment, it's not just the monthly rent or your monthly mortgage if you happen to buy a place, you also have to furnish everything. I don't really recommend moving furniture from the US to Europe
Right.
because the the apartments tend to be smaller,
Absolutely.
and everything in the US is big.
Mm-hmm.
And I miss my lazy boy sofa, but there was no way in the world it was coming in this apartment. And um, these are things you have to think about, and then you have to look at the cost of shipping it. So when I went to Germany, I didn't take any furnishings, nothing. I literally packed 4 bags and moved. When I came from the US, I sold everything. And what I did was I shipped my vehicle, and the container that my car came in, I actually put whatever boxes that can fit, like clothes that I wanted or keepsakes, and moved it to Sweden. And at that time, it was cheap compared to probably what it is now. But when I went to Germany, I just loaded up the car with 4 bags and moved. But either way, I looked for the best but most inexpensive option that I could. And I relocated and I stayed in that location until I knew that the job was secure. When I got when I passed probation in Germany, I did get an apartment in Germany. I don't know what's going on there, but you literally have to buy your own closets, your own kitchen, and sometimes your own bathroom.
When you mean, hold on.
I
So
know.
when you say buy it, what is
Yes,
what does that mean? Like there's just a room and there's no toilet there?
exactly.
No, I don't understand.
What I'm saying is they give you
What
a
year was
shit.
this? What year was this?
This was 2014, 2015. It's a shell of an apartment, and you have to buy your kitchen. And when I say buy your kitchen, I mean the cabinets, the appliances, and you have it, and you pay to get it installed.
In an
The apartment
apartment or a house? Like are you
in
saying
an
like you bought
apartment
this?
that you rent. And if you move, you take your kitchen with you. I've never seen anything like that before in my life. But yeah. So, depending on the country that you move to, it can be very expensive to get yourself into a new place. So it's rent, it's down payment or security deposit. It's whatever you need to make the apartment livable, furniture, kitchen, toilet,
What
which
do you
I
mean
think is a
toilet?
must.
People are just out here grabbing toilets to go move into an apartment. Maggie, is that what you're telling me?
I'm telling you, when I rented my apartment, it was available for me to move in like a month and a half. And the bathroom was already there. I didn't have to buy a bathroom, but I did have to buy a kitchen. But the guy who lived there before sold me his kitchen.
I can't. Now I'm gonna end up on the YouTubes and on the internets. I gotta visually see what you are talking about. So when you, so there is there like a portable shower that can go with you, or you just how and toilets? Like I
You
don't
you
get it.
you buy the stuff
Uh
and
huh.
you have it installed.
Now I gotta get on the internet, y'all. I gotta see what this look like because I don't
So
understand.
what I'm trying to highlight is it can get very expensive, which is why you want to be as frugal as
Right.
possible.
Right.
When I was here in Sweden, like there's no ceiling lights. You
Okay.
have to buy your own ceiling lights and
Okay.
you install them. You can hardwire them, but they have outlets in the ceiling.
Okay.
So the thing of it is you have to be prepared to set all of that up. So it's the cost of moving, it's the cost of acquiring the apartment, and it's the cost of making it livable for you. A lot of people here in Sweden, when they get their first apartment, because it's so expensive, they just buy everything at IKEA, which I'm not a big fan of IKEA. But the whole point is that for a couple of $1,000s, you can get almost everything you need and set up your apartment.
And IKEA is a Swedish company, right?
Yes.
So that's why they have these back. But they don't sell toilets. Are they toilet? You got to go get a toilet too, Maggie. Is that what you're telling me?
This is in Germany.
In Germany.
There's bathrooms here in Sweden, but in Germany, that can happen.
Okay. Okay.
I
What part
know
of Germany? I
because
refuse to believe all of Germany is rocking like this.
I'm telling you, it took me. I'm like, what do you mean I have to buy the kitchen? It was hard for me to comprehend too. Yes,
I can't.
I
I'm
was
like
in New.
I've seen apartments like even in Maryland, like in Baltimore, the properties I had, you can person may have to get their refrigerator or their stove or some places even here in Portugal. So I get that. I do
Yeah,
not understand going to get a bathroom. I don't understand that at all. And if you're foreign, how do you even know? So, I mean, because I feel like handyman and contractors are so hard. A good one is so hard to find in general. How do you just go find that when you're just going to get an apartment?
but add that to the list of complexities because maybe the landlord would tell you who you can go to, or
Wow.
like you can buy a kitchen from IKEA and then they'll come and
Right.
install it. Like the hookups are there, but they'll come and install the cabinets and things. But
That's
I'm
expensive.
exactly. So that's why I'm saying that when you move to a new country, don't be in a rush to just get a new place until you know that you are financially sound and your job is secure,
Yeah.
because that is an investment that you're making. You know, and you might be uncomfortable. It may not be your cup of tea or your decor, but it's far less expensive if things don't work out and then you lose that investment. So that is something to think about. Post COVID, a lot of jobs are hybrid or remote. I would say on average, they're hybrid. They would expect you to come to the office 2, 3 times a week. Um, Other than that, you might get lucky and be fully remote. Like my job is fully remote. Every once in a while, we might travel somewhere. Like I think we're going to Hungary in September. But usually it's and I like it because I'm not gonna lie. I think I stay half dressed, but that's another thing. But you can find hybrid and remote jobs, but you still, if you're looking to work for a company, you still need to work where they have a legal presence in that country because of the labor laws and the salaries. And I want to emphasize the point, don't compare US cost of living and salary to the country you're going to. You have to do the work to say what's the competitive salary. You might have to Google and look at what the average salary is for the jobs you're looking for, and then you have to look at, okay, you have to kind of start doing a budget of what things are going to cost you in that country. And then you can figure out, okay, is this a good salary? How am I going to be living, et cetera, et cetera. But when you move to a country like Sweden, the thing that you're going to benefit from, and I'm speaking of Sweden, and I think in Germany it's kind of similar, but you have access to healthcare in general. You don't pay, the only thing you pay is your tax contribution. When you go to the doctor, I think you have a 3,000 Swedish crown, aka maybe $300 to $400 a year deductible. So you pay like 150 to see the doctor, and once you get to 300 to 400, you don't pay anymore. So, like, I went for physical therapy and I had to pay, like 150 to see the doctor. And I'm talking crowns, not dollars. That's like 15 to $20. And after 3 or 4 visits, then I didn't have to pay anything else. You get that. If you are building your family, here in Sweden, they get 480 days of maternity leave for family leave. And usually the couple shares the maternity leave. So the wife may take a year, and then the father may take 6 months.
Okay.
And their job is guaranteed. They have to take you back when you come off maternity leave. Child care is subsidized. They have some type of child tax credit that you get. They have something called VABA, which means if you have to take off work to take care of your child, then that's allowed. They don't really have a limit on sick days. You get 20 to 30 days of vacation. And by law, I think at minimum, they have to allow you to take 3 weeks of vacation in the summer
Oh.
because the summers are short here. So, you know, you got to take advantage while you can. So you get a host of benefits, and it
Yeah.
goes further than that. The unions help you have job security, unemployment insurance. You have access to education and retraining. So the thing of it is that let's say you feel 20 to 30 grand less here in Sweden or in Germany compared to the U.S., but your quality of life may be better. Your cost of living is accommodated for because it's different than the US.
Yes.
So, that's something to think about. And when you're looking for jobs nowadays, it used to be where you would look every week when the new listings come up. Mm-mm. You look every day. Every day, it's 6 in the morning. See the new job ads that pop up, and not only look at LinkedIn, but look at companies that routinely hire, like gaming companies hire all the time,
Are you saying
and
gaming?
gaming,
Really?
like they have a lot of online casino games,
Oh,
other
wow.
games. Yeah, they hire a lot. Banks hire a lot, but usually banks require you to speak English and Swedish. But once you start seeing companies that usually have a large workforce or they're always hiring, make a habit of going to their website and looking for jobs and applying. So you have to be kind of a little bit aggressive.
And one other the things that I've noticed when I had to do research for another video, a lot of the staffing firms that are in the U.S. exist internationally. So Kelly
Yeah.
Services is just a remote or temporary staffing firm in the U.S. And from the research I did, they have locations, I know in Portugal, but all over the world. So like Manpower. Let's see if there's some other ones that I had that I can't remember, but there are various places that do temporary work, and temporary work during an economy like this where they're laying off a lot of people is a great place to look for employment, because
Mhm.
usually these large companies will go to a temporary staffing company because they don't have to pay for the benefits and all the other stuff for employees, so they can get temporary work, and that can easily go into permanent. There was actually one specifically that
Mhm.
I saw in Sweden that was like, if you want to move to Sweden, it was like, and I'll try to find it if I can in my notes, and I'll put it in the description. But they do have a lot of temporary staffing companies. But with temporary staffing companies internationally, it can be a little scary because, again, if it's temporary, if you don't get a temp to perm position, then your visa can be jeopardized. So definitely consider that.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a very good point. Because um, people have job security because they're growing their families, maybe. And this is something that also threw me for a loop. I cannot tell you how many times I've met somebody that went, "Oh, I'm not working right now. I'm on sick leave for a year." Well, what's wrong with you? Oh, I was stressed out. You got to be kidding me.
Yeah, yeah.
You're not dying. You don't have cancer. Or, you know what I'm saying? They're like, oh no, I was just stressed out. I'm taking off a year. But the the consulting contracting workers who they turn to because they don't want to permanently fill the position. So a lot of times what people will do is they will start their own consulting firms. You could start your own company in Sweden. And I'm speaking of Sweden specifically. I'm not sure about the other countries. And you can make yourself available for contract work where you can work during the duration of the contract. So like let's say somebody's on maternity leave for a year, you would have that assignment for a year. And like you said, there are times it can turn permanent, or at least you have time to look for your next assignment because you know when the assignment is due to end.
Whew, okay, I think that's helpful, right? I'm sure people can get some really good information from that. So, just to sum it up, of course, look for the websites, job search engines in the native language of the country you're looking to move in.
Mhm.
LinkedIn is a great resource. What else we got, Meg? What else did we talk about, Maggie?
Um, Once you go through the interviewing process and they accept you, they will help you with the getting your visa and your job requirement. We talked about saving money. You
Yes,
should
for
be able
sure.
to say,
Yes.
I could have so many months of living expenses just in case. We talked about um,
Finding out
living.
that tip you said, finding out if your industry has a lot of positions in that country. I think that was
Yes.
a very, very important tip. That was super
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
Yes. Checking out the availability of positions to see if they will hire outside the country is something you want to look for.
And do they
Uh,
usually put that in the post that they're willing to consider people who aren't, let's say, Swedish?
Sometimes,
Okay.
sometimes they will say not considering international,
Ah,
and
okay.
sometimes they are.
Okay.
Um, you want to not only look at LinkedIn, but connect to recruiters, and you also want to look at job sites that are popular in that country, and then you want to kind of get the websites of companies that are hiring and kind of check out their job boards on a regular. I always tell people who are looking for work, don't pay attention to the job title. Look at what the qualifications and the skills that they're looking for, and see if it aligns with you. Because it might be a job title you don't recognize. Um,
And
and
do
so
you
yeah,
find that they'll work with you a little bit? Like, let's say if you have some of the qualifications and maybe some not, and since it's all the way in another country, like, can someone feel semi confident to just apply anyway? Or is it more of a zero sums game?
no, I always say if you have at least 50% of the skills, go for it,
Okay.
as long as you have the key skills for that particular job. So, for example, if you're applying for a test automation engineer, you should know how to program, you know, something like that. But they may say, oh, you have to have knowledge in Scrum and you have to have, knowledge in the security industry. That's optional. But the hardcore skills you should have. And then one final tip that I'm thinking of is a lot of times when people are looking to relocate, they look at a particular city. Europe and their cities are not as large as the ones we have in the US, especially like if you live in areas like New York, Chicago, LA. Those are very big, expansive cities.
Right.
So here, don't be shy about looking at areas in proximity to where you want to live. So if you're looking at Sweden as an example, you can look at not only Stockholm, but Gothenburg, Malmö, Umeå are in Uppsala. They are very popular other places or destinations for great employment opportunities. And they also put you close to the city where you have a good quality of life, especially if you're young. So, in Stockholm is the most expensive, whereas the others are a little bit less expensive. And so they have very, very excellent public transportation. So where we in the US are very car dependent, it's not uncommon for people to take long distance trains or just public transportation because it's so good to
Right.
get to their jobs. So don't look at just, oh, it's the job in this city. Also look at, if I'm moving to Stockholm, I'm willing to go out an hour on public transportation and back. It may be hard, but you get my point, to kind of look in the surrounding areas as well.
No, that's helpful. Okay, folks, I hope that was helpful. Want to thank my guest, Maggie, for giving us all the knowledge as usual. Thanks for joining us, Maggie.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, folks, that is it. Until next time.